Once again, welcome to all of you to I&E Conversations. We're going to talk as Build with some leaders at some of the most innovative companies in the world about building culture, about the employee's role, also a little bit about the future. Partly the idea is to help everybody realize that we're all in this for the long term, and I hope one way to stay somewhat sane in a time like this is to think about the long arc of your career and your life, and this being really a few months of craziness in what is going to be a very long and I hope happy and successful life. We are so happy to have Rob Chesnut with us. Rob, for a while, I'm going to ask Rob to share his a little bit about his background, his interesting, very interesting background. But Rob is currently the Chief Ethics Officer at Airbnb, which, as you probably are in the same position I was in when I heard this, which is who knew that Airbnb had a Chief Ethics Officer? And we'll have Rob talk a bit about that. Before that, he spent about 4 years as general counsel, so that means he was the top lawyer at Airbnb. But I think as you hear Rob speak, you'll hear a very interesting evolution of his interests and his role at Airbnb. So let's begin by thanking Rob for joining us and welcoming him to our. And this is you know, our virtual. I know you can do this virtually, but you know. And two quick housekeeping things. One is we have to wrap this up at 12:55 today, so be ready for that. And finally, we got very good feedback last time, very nice comments, and it was very helpful for us to hear what you guys think of this event. So please take 2-3 minutes and give us your feedback afterwards. We'll share the link toward the end of the meeting. Having said that, welcome, Rob. Please tell us a little about yourself.
Thanks for having me. I'm from out that way. I grew up in Virginia, went to the University of Virginia, started my career as a federal prosecutor. I used to prosecute spies for a living. I was lucky enough to be in the same jurisdiction as the CIA. So, and I also did bank robberies and armored car robberies and drug dealers and all that kind of stuff. I was lucky in that there was a company in my jurisdiction by the name of America Online. You all probably haven't heard of America Online, but it was the way that all of us used to connect to the internet. And so I was sort of an early internet user because I looked at prosecuting them at one point. So I got one of their discs and stuck it in my computer and plugged my phone into the back and sort of got opened up to a new world. And one of the companies I started using on the internet was a company called eBay. And I liked eBay so much that I applied for a job with them. I sent a resume to jobs@ebay.com. They didn't have any job openings. They were a small company back then. But I ended up getting a response the next day and moved to California as employee 170 at eBay. Ran North America Legal for eBay, ran Trust and Safety for eBay. I then became the general counsel of a company that some of you all may use, I'm thinking, maybe, called Chegg. I helped take Chegg public. And then left Chegg to become the general counsel at Airbnb. So that's my background.
And so tell us a little bit about being the, how did you go from general counsel to being the Chief Ethics Officer at Airbnb?
You know, while I was the general counsel, a company down the road from us was getting in trouble. And that would be Uber. I was going online and reading stories of sexual harassment and all sorts of other problems at Uber. And then then the Me Too movement happened. All kinds of trouble for leaders all around, not just Silicon Valley, but around the world. And I remember sitting and thinking as the general counsel, somebody better do something about this. We could end up in that situation. And I don't want to have to deal with that stuff. And then I thought about it for a minute and said, who is it that deals with this sort of thing? Who's responsible for driving integrity into the culture of a company? And I thought about it a while. And I went and talked to our founder and CEO, Brian Chesky. And Brian and I talked about it for a bit. And Brian said, well, what do companies typically do? And I said, well, when you think about it, companies, they have a code of ethics. But usually the law firm gives them the code of ethics, or they download it off the internet, take it from some other company, and they stick their logo on top. And then they yell it out to all the employees and say, check a box and say you've read this. And that's it. Or they might put one of those compliance posters on the break room wall with that tiny little 4-point font that nobody reads. Or they might have one of those sexual harassment videos that are like 2 hours long that somebody else creates, and they make everybody watch it. And we talked about it, and it sort of struck me that those things really don't send much of a message. Everybody kind of knows you're doing it to check a box. And so Brian and I said, there's got to be a better way. And so Brian looked at me in Brian's way, typical way, and Brian said, go big. Go figure it out and go big. So that's what I did. I went, and so while I was general counsel, I started developing a program to drive integrity into the culture of the company there. And it actually was so interesting and took more time than I thought that I wrote a book about it. Somebody convinced me that writing a book was a good thing. I had never done that before, but I got a writer. I gave the writer 3 hours every Monday night, and we wrote a book. And then I liked the idea of doing this sort of stuff more full time. So I moved over. We created the position, and so that's what I do now.
Got to unmute myself. Very, very interesting. So, you mentioned Uber, and by the way, for those of you on the call, you may have seen that we have roughly Rob's equivalent from Uber joining us next Friday. So that will be interesting, and I think kind of a different story. Uber has been so visible with some of the, let me just say, transgressions that have occurred there. Not so much Airbnb. Are there any examples you can think of sort of gut-wrenching events or big events at Airbnb that really caused you to question how you were approaching things and really highlighted the need for a role like this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Look, every company has got issues like this. Every company, we all personally have integrity issues. None of us are perfect. I would say one of the most powerful ones at Airbnb was a movement called Airbnb While Black. And it was a number of users took to the internet to complain that they were being turned down to stay in people's homes because of the color of their skin. And then a couple of university professors actually started doing data studies of analytics, where they would use different profile pictures. And it became evident that the users were right, that you had a different success percentage of getting a yes to stay in someone's home based upon the color of your skin, which was very troubling. It spawned several lawsuits, and it spawned a lot of thinking inside the company about discrimination and what was our role in fighting discrimination on Airbnb. So it was what I call in the book, it was an integrity moment for us.
And so how did that change your thinking about the actual role of the company? Because it's kind of easy to start and say, we're just going to throw a technology platform out there, and then what people do on it's got nothing to do with us.
I think a lot of companies would have responded and said, we're just a platform, and we're not responsible for how people use the platform in ways that are illegal. I mean, and I think we were shocked. the company was shocked. I wasn't. I mean, I'm a former federal prosecutors are never shocked by bad human behavior. And when you think about it, discrimination exists all around the world. So why would it not exist on Airbnb? But it was interesting. I remember this actually blew up about 2 or 3 months after I joined the company as general counsel. And the first thing I did, of course, was run off and try to figure out the law. Is Airbnb legally responsible if its users, some of its users, discriminate? So I go off and talk to law firms and do my study, and I go sit with Brian, the CEO. All right, and Brian and it's kind of my first big meeting with Brian on something, and I start to talk to Brian about the law, Airbnb's legal responsibility in a situation like this, and Brian stops me, and Brian looks at me and says, "I don't care." I said, "What do you mean you don't care?" He said, "I don't care what the law is." He said, "This isn't a legal issue." I said, "All right." He said, "This is about the character of the company. Our mission is to bring people together through immersive travel. And it's to bring the world closer together." He said, "If this sort of thing is going on our platform," he said, "we're failing as a company and we're going to do something about it. And I don't really care what the law says." Which is great, because as a lawyer, this frees me up quite a bit. So one of the first things I did, one of the people that sued us was the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing. They filed a class action. This is the big California state agency that's responsible for discrimination in housing. So I get on an airplane, go down to LA, and meet with them. And they didn't even want to meet with me at first. I said, no. I said, "Come on, let's talk." So I go meet with them. I go sit down in the room with them, and I tell them, "Hey, look, you guys are right. We agree with you. We're as upset about this as you are. We're not going to stand for it. And we're going to not rest until we fix this." And that effectively ended the lawsuit. Because I said, "Look, whatever you would force us to do, we would probably do it on our own and then some." And it made it easy to resolve the legal issues. Now, the issue itself was a challenging issue, and it was an ethical issue. I still don't think that Airbnb is legally responsible in a situation like that. But I do think that it's an ethical issue. It's about what you stand for as a company. And I think the way that we handled it in working with civil rights organizations, in changing the way the website works, earned us a lot of credit with organizations around the world. And I'm proud of the way that we've dealt with it. I mean, there's still discrimination on Airbnb, but I think it is a lot less and a lot harder than it used to be. And I think that speaks well to us as a company.
All right, just a little bit on that. Are there negative ramifications for homeowners that you find actually do discriminate? And is there a mechanism that potential renters can report what they think is?
Yeah, all that. It's easy if somebody is openly racist. And we have situations where somebody literally says, I'm not going to rent to you because you're blank, Muslim, Black, Hispanic, whatever. And that's easy. And one of the things that we did was we basically took a timeout on the website. We put up a new homepage. We actually had a Super Bowl ad. If you're ever interested, you should look at, you guys should Google Airbnb Super Bowl ad. It's a really powerful advertisement about our commitment to belonging and accepting everyone regardless of their race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and the like. But I think that if you discriminate, we throw you off the platform, period. Now, if you're openly discriminating, that's easy. The challenge is if if someone turns you down, we don't know what your real reason is. They might say, "Oh, I didn't check my calendar. My brother-in-law is coming in from out of town that weekend. The place isn't available." So we can do some statistics and we can look and say, "Wow, you've accepted 25 people and you've turned down 3. And the 3 people you've turned down are all individuals of color, and the 25 you've said yes to are all white." That's a problem, and we can operate on that. But a lot of times it's not that clear cut. Um, but we have thrown thousands of people off the platform. And by the way, we lost some business in the short run. We required all users to agree to a non-discrimination statement. And by the way, this is a global statement. So in many places in the world, it is not illegal to discriminate based on the color of your skin. But we said we don't care. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, you're going to agree to this statement. And if you don't agree to this statement, you are not going to be able to be on Airbnb. And we lost about 1% of our user base that did not agree to that statement. But that's okay.
Right. All right, great, thanks. So let's just step back a little bit and give us a sense of how successful you've been at Airbnb in creating the kind of culture that you want to create, and has it changed how employees behave and their feeling of responsibility in the company? And
yeah, I think so. One of the things I worried about when I sort of started building this program was there are going to be a lot of young people that look and say, "Oh, that's some old guy trying to impose morals on me." You really don't know what the response is going to be. I think a lot of us are uncomfortable talking about integrity because it feels a little quasi-religious, quasi-moral. Like, who are you to tell me what's right or wrong or what's good or bad? So you have to be careful that it doesn't come across as preachy. What shocked me was that the company employees have really embraced this. I get people coming up to me all the time. Sometimes I'll bet you I've had 10 people come up to me in tears, literally in tears after one of our integrity presentations and say, "You have no idea what it means to work for a company that cares about this stuff." And these would be people that worked at Google, Facebook, all the other companies. And they say, "You know what? I've never heard anybody at any company actually talk about this stuff. Nobody talks about it. And it makes me proud to work for a company that cares enough to have a conversation about it," which is kind of the point of my book. The integrity at many companies is a poster on a wall. It's a pretty sunset. It's got a lake. Maybe it's got some pretty trees. And it's got the word integrity underneath. And it's got a cheap metal frame around it. And nobody ever talks about it. And nobody knows what it means. The kind of integrity that we talk about is we're going to have an open, honest human conversation about what it means. We're going to actually talk about discrimination. We're going to talk about sexual harassment. We're going to talk about things like, can you hug somebody at work? Can you hug somebody at work? Can you drink alcohol in a work setting? And by having an open conversation about that stuff and giving people human opinions about this is the way that we are going to be as a company, and telling people about that and being open and direct, the response I get is, "Thank goodness we're talking about it, because I'm scared, because I don't know what the rules are anymore. I don't know what we can do. Can I ask out another employee? Can I hug another employee? Is it okay to go out drinking with a bunch of employees? What's okay anymore?" And what I found is that people love the clarity. People love having a conversation about it, knowing what the rules are. They love the fact that a company cares about it.
so what do you ask from your employees to sustain that kind of culture?
I ask that people Why you have to buy in. I mean, you show up at different talks we have, you watch videos, except the videos we do, I mean, we do the 2-hour sexual harassment video because we've got to, but we do 3-minute videos. We do shorter things. But I ask people to buy in. And it's like, look, this is the way that we're going to operate as a company. Here's our purpose. Here's our mission. Here are the rules that we're going to abide by. This is how we're going to treat each other. And if you're going to work here, this is the way we do it. So we want people to buy into that. We want you to work at Airbnb because your values and your purpose align with ours. We want you to respect other people in the workplace and recognize that bad behavior can impact somebody else's career, and you've got to be sensitive to that. And we ask people to speak up. Look at so many companies. I know a bunch of people at companies, and they've got a reporting hotline, right? Where you can report unethical behavior, or you can report violations of the code of ethics. And all the people proudly tell me, Rob, we don't have any problem because we don't have any complaints. I'm like, I think you got a problem. I think the problem is that you don't have any complaints. You want a culture where people can speak up and they're not afraid to raise a problem. If they see something that's troubling, they're not afraid to talk about it. So, what I want from people is I want them to participate in a culture where they can talk about things. And if they see something that's troubling, raise it and we can look into it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rob. So guys, we're going to transition in just a moment to opening it up and taking your questions for Rob. I'm going to ask him 2 quick questions before we do that. And we had a few questions submitted in advance, and I tried to scan to see if the questioners were on the line, and I'm not sure. Betsy and Justin and Ling, if you're around, I'm going to call on you first. But so just, and if you don't mind, maybe either raise your hand or let me know in the chat if you'd like to raise a question. But Rob, apparently the hospitality industry has taken a bit of a hit.
So I've heard.
What's the future looking like for Airbnb?
I think I think curiosity and travel are very human traits. I don't think that the world is going to stop traveling permanently. I do believe that there's going to be a slow recovery for the travel industry. I think that until everybody's got a shot, I think that people are going to be more reluctant to get on airplanes and travel, particularly long distances. So I think the next year is going to be a slow recovery. I do think that the world will get back to normal. I think it will probably be next year. And I think, when it does, we will go back to doing what we all love to do, which is explore new places.
Right. Great. And so many of the people on this in this meeting are soon to graduate. Any advice for people entering the workforce in the summer of 2020?
Yeah, it's what an interesting time to be entering the workforce, and it's got a lot of challenges, right? Because I think there are a number of companies that are impacted, their hiring's impacted by this. I don't know, but I still give everybody the same advice that I would give in a quote unquote normal time, and that is, I think you have the best opportunity to find fulfilling work through connections and through your passions. Look, I got a job at eBay from being a federal prosecutor because I was an eBay user. I was a passionate eBay user. And that really, I think, shone through in my resume, my interview, and it made me a better eBay employee. Same thing with Airbnb. I think you are most likely to get a job. Look, you're interviewing for a job every day. You've been interviewing for a job ever since you got to college. You build a brand every day, and somebody that you know in college is going to play a role in your career down the line. Now, you don't know who that person is right now, but it's a small world, and there are networks. The impressions that you make now will be important 10 years from now. And so work, every day, be something that you're proud of. Recognize that you're building your brand. You have no idea. Over and over again in my life, someone from earlier on in my network has played a role in my career. And you never know who it'll be. So be nice to everybody. Really, build your brand. Build your brand every day. And slowly, bit by bit, over time, it will pay off.
Thank you, Rob. I'm notoriously bad at missing things. But is Betsy Blitch? I don't see her, but is she? Betsy, if you're on, I'm going to take your question first. And if you're not,
I don't see her.
I don't either. Justin,
Betsy, where are you? Come on, man.
Yeah, where are you? And Justin Koga, you put
good question. You're teed up.
So let's just wing it. Does anybody want to throw a question to Rob? Raise your hand.
We have Linda. Linda Zhang has raised her hand.
Linda.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for coming. I have a question on the recent online experience series Airbnb launched. Would love your insights on the considerations put behind it, but also more importantly, the long-term ethical implication of putting an Olympic medal awardee online to talk to the public.
Yeah. Well, look, I think when in a crisis, you've got to be able to pivot and move your business in a direction where the world is. We have thousands, tens of thousands of experience hosts with interesting skills that they want to share with the world. And when the travel industry shut down, they were out of business. And I think what we found in talking to users was we had a lot of people just sitting around at home, love the opportunity to be engaged in an online experience and see another part of the world, even if it's only through a camera. It is an opportunity to entertain and inform people remotely. The experiences are inexpensive. I think they're like anywhere between there's some is like $5, $10, $20. But for $5, $10, $20, you can be literally transported to Japan, to Chernobyl, to Italy, to spend time with a host and another small group of people and learn something. It gives those people an opportunity to learn some income. And it gives you an opportunity to, at least in your head, get out of your apartment and get out of your house. So the host loved it, wanted to do it. And apparently a lot of users really like it. It's not going to change the financial trajectory of the company, but it does give, it's consistent with our mission. One of the things that we've done too is we partnered with the U.S. Olympics, not the U.S. Olympics. We've partnered with the Olympic Committee. It's fascinating. Olympic athletes are obviously incredibly talented and very interesting people. I was once told that the most interesting people are often those who have the least money, right? they pursue very interesting, creative careers, but they aren't always financially rewarding. One of the cool things about experiences is that it gives interesting, creative people an opportunity to share what they're passionate about and make a little money from it. So Olympic athletes are usually not very well off. It's expensive to be an Olympic athlete. It doesn't pay very well. So one of the reasons the Olympic Committee wanted to partner with us was to give the Olympic athletes an opportunity to share what they do with people who are interested in their particular sport, and give the athlete an opportunity to make a little bit of money legally according to the Olympic rules, and also give all of us, anybody in the world that's interested, the opportunity to have some exposure to what that athlete does. So whether it's in person or online, I think you'll see a number of Olympic athlete experiences on Airbnb. And I think it's great. I think it's good for the athletes and good for members of the public to get that exposure.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Don't be shy. I'm going to pause, uncomfortable pause for a few seconds.
What about the question from the woman who is here or who isn't here?
Well, so there's two questions that, so I'll actually have three questions. One is, and let me make this, so Justin asked about what's the experience needed to work in technology ethics. Let me just change that a little bit, and you can answer that, but also what makes somebody the kind of employee you want to find for Airbnb? What are the qualities? Obviously, you're looking for technical skills, but what are the qualities that you look for in people?
Well, I mean, one thing that I think is true for any company, we want people that are passionate about our mission. I mean, one thing when you think about a company is, why does the company exist? What's the purpose? What's its mission? If the purpose is profit, then I think you are not going to have a very successful company. I think that profit enables purpose. But what I look for are people that really get why Airbnb exists, understand what motivates people who go to work there every day, and it aligns with their personal values. I mean, look, Airbnb is not about efficiency, although there are many good efficiency reasons why Airbnb is good for the world. It's not about profit, although I think Airbnb will be a profitable company. It's about fostering belonging. It's about connecting people from different parts of the world so that when they spend time together, they realize that maybe they're not as different as they might have thought they were. It's about getting out of the fancy Western hotel when you're traveling and staying in a neighborhood. It's about getting out of the Starbucks and going to the local coffee place. And I think for Airbnb wants people that get that and whose personal way of life is consistent with that. I wouldn't apply for a company unless I use their product. Because I think companies want people who understand their product. And because if it resonates with you personally, you're going to be a more enthusiastic employee. We have a hand. Jane.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for joining us today. The conversation is
Sure.
really helpful. Something that I've noticed is just that in general, there are a lot of new companies that are doing, for example, like direct-to-consumer birth control instead of going to a pharmacy. There's like Uber, for example, that's trying to make car rides more accessible as opposed to like taxis that have traditional licenses. So I'm seeing that a lot of these like regulations maybe are being relaxed in order to have this innovation. So I'm curious what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah. I think a lot of new companies are born out of a frustration with regulation. When there's a lot of regulation, that can be a big impediment to people using a product. Now, that doesn't mean the regulation's wrong. In some cases, regulation's actually good. And one thing I think the world has to grapple with is with these startups, startups push the law sometimes, often in a healthy direction, but not always. You know, many times, I'll give you an example, eBay. eBay, when I was at eBay, I remember getting letters from state auction regulators saying, you're running an auction and you need to comply with state auction laws. And we were talking things like you must have a sign that is at least 24 inches by 48 inches outside the place of auction. I mean, things that had nothing to do with eBay or the internet. So I think that there's a fascinating dance between innovation and regulation. Usually regulation is behind and has to catch up. Often regulation is based upon an old world and it doesn't exactly quite apply because the world's moving so quickly. So they're fascinating ethical and legal issues around to what extent is it okay and good for the world for companies to push the law and push the outer boundaries when the world's changing and the law maybe hasn't caught up yet. I don't have a definitive answer for you because I think it depends on the circumstances and probably depends a little bit on your view of how much good startups provide to the world versus the value of strict law and order.
Great, good question, and thanks for that, Rob. So the chat thing has gotten a bit active. I don't know if you're going to read these, Rob, but take a look at Tanisha's question first, and then Amy's question, and that might give you. So I think since it went to everybody, you can all read this. Actually, I guess I just have a phone. The first is, many people are dependent on Airbnb for their livelihood. Does the company have any responsibility to support them at a point in time where their livelihood is interrupted? Yeah. And then Amy asked a more general question about has company culture had to change during this time? How does the company continue to focus and reinforce its culture? So I think that specific question is a great way to start.
Yeah, great questions. All right, let me take Amy's first. We have been out of our office for over a month. So the entire company is working from home, which definitely has a big impact on your culture. I think there's also a lot of fear in times like this. Our revenues have plunged, as the world has stopped traveling. We have stopped all hiring. We've let go of a lot of contractors. We may need to lay off some employees. So there's certainly fear. I'd say that a crisis really pressure tests your culture. And we're working through that. One thing we've done is we've really ramped up communication. Our CEO has a live Q&A for all employees every Thursday, 4:00. He's from his house, and employees can ask questions. So I think that you respond to times of crisis and fear with communication, and we're trying to do that. I would say that the culture is certainly challenged and pressure tested, but there are our values haven't changed and our purpose hasn't changed. So I think we're doing fine, but I don't think there's any question that it challenges it. Tanisha's interesting. She phrased it, she didn't phrase it as a question. She said, during such a time, you have an ethical responsibility to support your host community, which is interesting. What is your ethical responsibility to anybody in these circumstances, right? I mean, the way that Airbnb looks at it, Airbnb, traditionally companies have one stakeholder, right? And that is your shareholders. Do what is right for your shareholders, and then you are a good company, period. The problem with that approach, which by the way, that has been the unchallenged world approach toward companies for decades. The problem with it is you're making a lot of decisions based purely on short-term money. Brian, our CEO, does not believe in that single stakeholder approach. And I think the last 2 years in particular, the world is changing quickly and companies are abandoning the single stakeholder approach and companies are moving to a multi-stakeholder approach. So to give you an example, Airbnb, we believe we have 5 stakeholders. Shareholders are clearly one of them, right? We definitely owe and need to and have obligations to our shareholders. But we also believe that our employees are stakeholders, our guests are stakeholders, our hosts are stakeholders, and the communities where we operate are stakeholders. And when we make decisions, we need to be thinking about the impact of our decisions on all of these stakeholders. So the fact that you phrased it, you have an ethical responsibility to support your host community, we look at it that way. We probably don't have a legal obligation to support them. They're not our employees. They use our platform, but we view them as important stakeholders and do believe we have an ethical responsibility to help them. We had a big challenge. I mean, I talked about discrimination earlier. Another crisis was when the pandemic hit, a number of our hosts have strict cancellation policies. So what do? Suppose you were planning your spring break in April in Italy, and you made a reservation on Airbnb to get a villa. Expensive, right? And when you made the reservation, it was clear, no cancellations. If you cancel, you still owe the money. So you make that reservation back in January. Well, in April, you can't even get there because you can't even get into Italy. It's illegal for you to travel there. What should happen? Well, the guest will come to you and the guest will say, well, Rob, I can't even get there. How can you force me to pay for this villa when I can't even legally travel there? In fact, if I legally travel there, I risk spreading the virus because travel is bad for the world at this point. We all need to be in our homes. On the other hand, the host will look at us and say, hey, Rob, I got a mortgage to pay here. I relied on Airbnb and relied on that promise of money. You can't change the deal on me. The deal was that reservation is good and can't be canceled. So what do you do in that circumstance? Ethically, there's no win, right? Whatever you do, somebody is going to say that you're being unethical. The way that we handled it was we allowed guests to cancel, even though the reservation said non-refundable, because we do have a provision. It's called a force majeure provision, which basically means that in extraordinary circumstances, Airbnb can allow you to cancel. So we deemed this to be an extraordinary circumstance. We allowed guests to cancel. Now the host hated it. Of course, the host community went nuts. So what we did was we put aside an extraordinary sum of money for Host. We put aside $250 million. That's a lot of money. And what we did was we told Host, we will pay you 25% of what you would have gotten. And Airbnb will pay it out of its own pocket. We don't legally have to do it. We are doing it because you're important stakeholders, you're our partners, and we want to help you. Brian, Joe, and Nate, our three founders, each kicked in another $3 million of their personal money. And then at Airbnb, when you are employed at Airbnb, you get a $500 travel credit every quarter so that you can travel and use the site. A bunch of employees got together and said, you know what? We can't really travel this quarter anyway. So 2,000 employees all donated their $500 to Host, and that raised another $1 million. So all of that money's gone to Host. So that's what we're doing to try to and Host and the community at large in a time like this. So that's a good question.
That's great. So Jordan, would you like to ask your question live?
Where are you, Jordan?
There she is. Oh, sorry, briefly.
Hi, Jordan. I saw you, Jordan.
Oh.
You want to know the path for a
Okay.
high school student?
To have your job, Rob, not just any job, your job.
My job. First of all, I tell you that there are not very many chief ethics officers. It's a new trend. Salesforce has got one, for example. I think you're going to see more and more of it because what we're learning is that ethical companies actually outperform the market and they beat their peers. So if you care for all of your stakeholders and you try to do the right thing, what data is showing is that you're actually going to make more money in the long run. So I think you're going to see an increased focus from companies on ethics. At this point, there is no defined path. Law school might be one way. I mean, but I don't know that law school is the only way to do it. I think that no matter what, you have to be grounded. You have to have a good sense of business and a good understanding of business in order to do the job that I've got. So I think what I would do is study business or law. But if you're studying law, work your way to being in-house. If you're studying business, I think the study of business has to include a substantial element of studying ethics and integrity. Either path you choose, make sure that you are spending time raising the interesting ethical questions that are involved. Make that part of your brand. And I think that if you have a good, strong business sense and integrity is part of your brand because it's something you demonstrate that you care for and believe in, I think that can be a path to a job like this, because I don't think there is a defined ladder or specific checkbox of things you must have to be a chief ethics officer. I think it is a good sense of business, good judgment. People have to trust you. And, you know, I think you have to make it part of your brand to care about this stuff.
And I am going to add a possibly shameless plug. You could be a philosophy major as part of helping you with your critical thinking. And in fact, on that point, when you look at applications, do you care what people major in, or do you care more about what they are passionate about and what their experiences are?
We don't typically hire right out of college. I think engineers may be the only exception. So I can honestly tell you that I don't care one bit what people major in. I don't even remember ever looking at it on a resume.
Interesting. Okay. I think we are about out of time, so we are going to wrap it up here. Let me again ask you your thoughts, your feedback are very important to us, so please take a minute or two. And then please join me in thanking Rob for a very interesting, thought-provoking discussion. Thank you so much, Rob. Give him a big hand, not virtual.
Rob.
And
Thanks for the
we
time.
look forward to seeing you at Duke, and let's hope it's still in 2020.
I look forward to it. Thank you. I'll
Okay.
see you guys later. You guys feel free to LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to follow what I do, feel free to reach out. I will happily link with you all, okay?
Yeah, and we'll share your email address. Thanks, everybody. Please stay safe. Take care.
guys.
I look forward to seeing you guys all next week.